Welcome back. Now we are on an absolute roll here, but let's not stop there. We've put it all together. We've replicated equation 1. We've now got a way to turn our images into a flattened sequence of patch embeddings, which is equation 1 here. We've got that in PyTorch code now. And if we go back to figure 1, we've now got this little section here. Got a way to patchify our image and turn it into a linear projection of flattened patches. So now let's start working towards replicating the transformer encoder. And the transformer encoder, as you can see, is comprised of 4 main layers, but also comprised of 2 main blocks. So I'm going to call this a block here, and this a block here. So this block is defined by equation 2, and this block is defined by equation 3. So let's start with replicating this block here, or equation 2. So if we jump down here, we've got this. It's a fair bit going on here, but we've got Z prime of a certain layer equals MSA, which stands for multi-head self-attention. MSA layer wrapping a layer norm layer with the input of the previous layer, so ZL-1, plus that input. Residual, or skip connection. That's a fun word to say, residual. So a fair few things going on there, but of course, if you wanted to learn more, how could you find out? I've already searched this. What is multi-head self-attention? Plenty of resources there. What is layer norm? Plenty of resources there. So let's jump back to the keynote. So that's how you would find more information about what we're covering. We're going to focus on writing the code to implement it though. So just to rehash, here's what we've done so far. We've split our image into patches. We've flattened those patches, or we've embedded them. This is what we've already done, equation 1. Kernel size equals patch size, tick. Embedding of this patch, tick. Embedding of all the other patches, tick, 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 tick. Flatten into a sequence. We've got that. This is what we're up to so far. We've got that. Then we added the class token embedding over here. Then we added the positional token embeddings. Beautiful. Now we need to start replicating the transformer encoder block. So let's get started on that. We don't need to see any more of that. You can replay that if you like. Equation 2, the MSA block. This is what it's called. MSA stands for multi-head self-attention. Equation 2 is, we're going to refer to this as the MSA block. So the transformer encoder, which is this grey big block here, consists of alternating layers of multi-headed self-attention, so multi-headed self-attention, and MLP blocks, equation 2 and 3. Equation 3 is the MLP block. And layer norm, which is this yellow layer here, is applied before every block. So layer norm here, layer norm before MSA, that's why it's on the inside of the brackets here. And residual connections are after every block. So this is this, we're adding the input to the output of the block. And the same thing with up here. But we're going to begin with replicating this, equation 2, the MSA block. So if we wanted to learn a little bit more about multi-head attention, well, one thing, we could search it. So what is multi-head self-attention? And we've got some explanations here. We find that it was first introduced in the paper Attention is All You Need. So we'll let this load. It might take a little bit longer to load because the PDF's on archive. Oh, that's pretty quick, but we'll come back to that in a second. But if we wanted to find out more about it, where else could we find out? Well, the paper says here, Appendix A. So if we look at what Appendix A says, we have multi-head self-attention from Attention is All You Need paper. And look at this, we have more equations. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But the beautiful thing is that for many of these layers here, is that PyTorch has implemented them for us. So typically, if a layer gets used quite often, PyTorch will recreate this. So we have standard QKV self-attention. That's a little bit hard to read for me. From S.A. Vaswani et al. 2017. So that is the Attention is All You Need paper. If we go up here, we're jumping around a bit, but that's all right because this is the nature of research and paper replicating. There's Ashish Vaswani. So that's that name, Attention is All You Need, from 2017. There's a whole bunch of other researchers from Google Brain and University of Toronto. So this is why paper replicating is a bit of a challenge, right? Because not only is this paper authored by a dozen or so researchers from the Google Brain team, it leverages research from a whole other team of people from the Google Brain team. And of course, that's not all. There's a lot more references down below here. So this paper is built off the research from about 30 or 40 others. So we're not doing any small feat here. But let's jump back. Attention is all you need. If we scroll through here, where do we find it? You can read all this as extension if you want. There's the original transformer network. As you can see, this is very similar to our transformer encoder. We've got a multi-head attention, add a norm, feed forward, add a norm. Feed forward is another word for MLP. We've got our input embeddings, but this was originally for text. Ours is for images. So we come down here, attention, beautiful. So we've got an attention function can be described as a mapping, a query, and a set of key value pairs to an output, where the query, keys, and values and output are all vectors. So we've got a vector right now. We've got an embedding vector of our flattened sequence of images. The output is computed as a weighted sum of the values, where the weight assigned to each value is computed by a compatibility function of the query with the corresponding key. So this is where papers get a little bit technical, like compatibility function. Behind the scenes, it is actually just a matrix multiplication. You see here? The output is computed as a weighted sum of the values, where the weight assigned to each value is computed by a compatibility function of the query with the corresponding key. So to me, that sounded quite wordy. But if you look at it in a diagram or this beautiful colorful block figure, we just pass in the query and the key as vectors. So this nomenclature could really be smaller letters because a smaller letter usually is a vector, a capital letter is a matrix. But we matrix multiply Q and V, then we scale them by some parameter, masks them optionally. So the masking was to do with text, you would hide a word. Softmax function, we've seen the softmax function in Torch Softmax. So you see what we're doing here? We're trying to just map everything that you find in a paper to some sort of code. There's PyTorch's softmax. And then we take the output of this series of functions here on the query and the key and do another matrix multiplication on the value. There's the scaled dot product attention. And then for multi-head attention, we do the exact same thing, scaled dot product attention, we put this into here, except we do it across multiple other dimensions. So we add a dimension here for depth. So if you'd like to read more about this, I'd encourage you to jump into the paper. Attention is all you need. It may take you a few times, but you can also search attention explained. One of my favorites is J. Alamar. I've linked this in the book version of the course, PyTorch paper replicating. So the illustrated transformer. So if we look attention, what do we have? So self-attention layer, feed forward, we've got colorful blocks, we're encoding, self-attention at a high level. So previously, this is a great diagram. When attention was introduced, it was for text. And so the idea of self-attention is if we input a vector and say our vector was a series of words, the whole idea of self-attention is which words should pay attention to each other. As in, if you were to read the sentence, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired. So the word it, what does the word it relate to? In this sentence, the word it, because it was too tired, relates to the animal most. So this is why this is the darker color here. Whereas it doesn't really relate to the words because. You see how because is faint here? Now, we want to replicate this same paradigm, but with images. So what do we have right now? So if we go back, let's go to figure 1. We have, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. We have turned our image into a linear projection of flattened patches. So you could imagine this as a series of tokens or a series of words in a string. So we've essentially turned our image into a sequence of words. Now we want to use the self-attention mechanism or the multi-head attention mechanism so that our patch embeddings know which patch, so each patch knows which patch to pay attention to on a high level. So is this patch significantly related to this patch? Or is this patch significantly related to this patch? Or this patch to this patch? Well, for us, we can quite clearly see that all the patches are related, but the whole idea is that we want this attention mechanism to learn which patch should be most related to another patch. We don't want to have to define that in programmatic rules. So we want this relationship to be learned and this representation to be learned. That's why we incorporate it in a neural network. So a fair bit going on there, but if we jump back to the keynote, we can see what's happening here. So we have multi-head self-attention from the paper Attention is All You Need, originally introduced for text to pass in query, key, and value to go through a series of equations here. We pass in the query, key, and value equals something. Then we calculate attention by passing in the values here to a softmax formula. We can do that with pure PyTorch if we wanted to. We take the dot product of the query and the key transposed. Then we divide it by, where does D come from? Well, D is our embedding dimension. So we scale it, that's scale dot product attention. Then we take the output A and multiply it with V. So what these series of equations have done is if we go back to the paper Attention is All You Need, a little extension here is that if you wanted to map that, we've just replicated this. In these equations in Appendix A, we'll just go here, Appendix A, so the transformer encoder consists of alternating layers of multi-head self-attention, MSA, see Appendix A. We've got 3 equations here. These 3 equations, and then subsequently this one, is exactly from Attention is All You Need. So we've got this, scale dot product attention, which is these 3 steps here. And then we've got multi-head attention, which is this steps here. But if we wanted to implement multi-head self-attention in PyTorch, well, of course, we could replicate each one of these equations line by line. But the beautiful thing about PyTorch is that if we look up PyTorch multi-head attention, we've got it here in a PyTorch layer. So it takes in KQV, which is what we've already seen. And you might be wondering what KQV is. Well, the whole idea of self-attention, do we have the word self here? Self-attention is that, this is what tripped me up a bit. The query, key, and value are all instances of the same vector. So that's where the idea of self-attention comes from. So if we go back to this diagram here for text, the self-attention mechanism is asking the question, how much should a given sequence pay attention to itself? Do you see what I mean here? The animal is paying attention to the word it. Now we want to replicate this, but with image patches, hence self-attention of a given sequence. So in our case, a sequence of image patches, or in this case, words. Which word or which image patch should pay most attention to which other word or image patch in the same sequence? So it'll take a while to sort of get your head around this, but that's the whole crux of self-attention. And we can implement it with a PyTorch layer here. So before this video gets too long, we're going to start to write some code in the next video. So I'm just going to put this here, this heading here. My challenge to you is to do what we've just done, but the exact same thing for the layer norm layer. So equation 2, we'll call it multi-head self-attention. This will make a lot more sense once we see it in code. So the MSA block. So before we go to the next video, one final challenge is see if you can do what we've just done for the norm layer. So look up what is layer norm and then layer norm in PyTorch. I'll see you in the next video.